Marry me, Annie here. Tonight I'm thinking about labels. The labels I may give myself, the labels I may put upon another, or that they may put upon me. And I'm thinking they can be good things and they can be limiting things. And I'm thinking of Hedgewich's comment that the moment we put a label on ourselves, we may have limited ourselves if we're not careful. And I like that. I think a healthy relationship to anything, any word we choose to describe ourselves would be that our definition of the word changes, or that we have complete freedom to take the word out of our vocabulary at any time. That's a healthy relationship, I think, to naming something. I've used a lot of words to describe myself over the years in the pagan community, and a lot of them I use to facilitate communication more than I actually own them personally as a description. For instance, I'm very comfortable saying that I'm a witch. But I would have to say my relationship to that word is very different now than it was when I first decided to use that label when I was in my early 20s. At that point, the label was really a statement of feminism and power and flying in the face of the traditional, as I took those first steps in defining what would I be outside the expectations of others of me. My very definition of the word has changed over the years. My relationship to the word now, if I say that I'm a witch, is really just simply to say that I am a natural woman, that I am a comfortable living in this sphere, relating to the energies of this sphere. It has to do with my relationship to botanicals and stones and nature and the spirits of nature. Very different relationship to the word. I've held onto that word over the years, but the definition I use for it has changed drastically. I haven't used the word pagan all the years of my adult life, probably over the last 20 years especially so. It wasn't a term I remember used much in my early, quote, pagan years. I'm trying to remember what we may have called ourselves, and I think in those days, we're talking the 70s, we really were eschewing labels. So there weren't many. I remember we called ourselves heathens, and that kind of changed through the 70s, I guess, because heathenry became more a recognition of the northern traditions instead of the Celtic ones, for instance, the ones that I was trained in. Paganism and being called pagan, being comfortable with the label pagan, really developed for me in the online community, when it was a very convenient label to use as a starting place to recognize others out there in that huge internet world. Meeting others of like mind, where was the starting place to be? And it was a really good starting place. So used it more then. I'm very comfortable with it. I see it as a starting place for a conversation, very much an umbrella term. I don't think that you can assume anything of me if I say I'm a pagan woman or vice versa, except that we're open to have that conversation and get to know each other, and that we probably do have something in common. The fun part is then we get to explore and figure out what that is, and maybe learn something from each other along the way. So witch and pagan, two comfortable labels that I assume for myself. The word Wiccan is an interesting one for me. Now my background, if you haven't seen any of my other videos, is I come from a very traditional background, trained in the early 70s, so through a system of initiation and degree, and became high priestess. So it's a very formal tradition. But we did not call ourselves Wiccans. We were members of the Wicca. And the reason I thought I'd explain this, because I know, honoring Hedgewich's comment, that a lot of people that we'll meet on YouTube are either young or newly experiencing the path, solitary by choice, or solitary because the opportunity to meet others of a like mind shared goals just hasn't happened yet. So I thought I'd share a little bit about what the word Wicca, Wiccan, means to me, because you will meet people like me as you wander about. So when it comes to labels, sometimes, because I am honest about the fact that I am a traditionalist and that I am a high priestess and my background's very formal, immediately labels covers me in labels to some people who might be meeting me and getting to know me early on. Some of you will react to that, and you will assume certain things about me which may or may not be true. I only hope that we can learn through an exchange what of your perceptions are true, and that we can learn a little bit more about each other in the real world and not what we assume of each other. So there's labels that work both ways. When I was coming up, we called ourselves members of the Wicca. We did not call ourselves Wiccans. And the reason I wanted to share that is, it will help you understand, if you don't have an experience of this, the difference in how some of us relate to the word. Our entire spirituality was communally driven. It was all about coming together in our covens, about group magic, celebration. It was about our priestess becoming the oracle for us. It was about the relationship of the men and the women in our circles. Individually, we did not refer to ourselves as Wiccans. I don't think we even had a term for ourselves individually. I was trying to think this. I even went back to early journals. Never called myself pagan, witch, Wiccan. There just wasn't a label. Now the shadow of difference there, which is not important, but could be interesting as we get to know each other with our differences and experiences, is being a Wiccan permits in this, especially through the 80s and the 90s, as individuals were learning and studying on their own, practicing solitary by choice or by necessity. Individually, a person would be a Wiccan. Now, through the 80s, I struggled with that because, to me, the religion was one of community. You really couldn't be a solitary Wiccan. It didn't mean you couldn't practice your spirituality, your magic, your prayers alone, but I wouldn't use the term Wiccan to describe that. Then, I found my first time without a coven of my own. Due to the natural change in things, a coven disbanded. I had no one to practice with, no magic partner, no working partner, no family, no priest, no priestess, no coveners, even for me as a high priestess. So I was faced with, well then what am I? Am I one of the Wicca? Well, what Wicca? There's no one else, it was just me. And that's when I developed my relationship to the word, which permitted me to take on the label that I am a Wiccan. So my relationship to that word has changed rather drastically since the 70s and 80s. And I think you will sometimes meet people like me who had an opinion that what you may or may not do as a solitary practitioner and whether it deserves the same label. Well, my experience is, indeed it does. It is not the same experience that I have whenever I'm working with my groups, but the joy of it is, it's the starting place for us to have a discussion that, oh, you're Wiccan? What does that mean to you? How do you practice? What do you do? And hopefully that exchange that goes both ways. I would hate to think that because I am honest about being from a formal tradition and practicing very ceremoniously, that would give you a label that limits your perception of me. That flow to me is very important back and forth. So I would say I'm a witch, I am a pagan, I am a Wiccan. So there's my thoughts on what I call myself, or what I might call you, and what you might call me. It's important and it's useless all at the same time. I wish you mirth and reverence. Mary Part.